The snow came down like sifted chalk, a powder you could breathe, a powder that numbed the inside of the mouth and left the tongue tasting of slate and iron. He cleaved through it with a wing beat that made the air shriek. The cold gnawed at the membranes between his pinions and bit through the thinner scales along the joints where pale veins glowed faintly, blue under gold. Pain had its own taste, copper and soot. He knew fire, the inward roar that had always answered his mother's voice, the downward pull of her command, the scent of her hair and skin when she stood before him as small as a flicker of light upon a cliff, yet forever the center of all horizons. He also knew the spear. The spear had been the only stillness in the world. When it flew, it ate every sound around it, every breath, and the world narrowed to its long, dark point and the ice-blue glare behind it. It came toward him with the inevitability of winter. He had turned at the last instant, instincts older than language wrenching his body aside so that instead of the throat or eye it struck the meat of the shoulder, driving into scales that had hardened under summers that no longer existed up here. It did not pass through. It lodged. It burned, cold, colder than cold, a burning that denied the truth of heat. And where it lodged, the muscles spasmed and his wings seized and half-folded, and he dropped like an ash from a dead fire. The impact broke a lake. The lake smashed back. He came up to air with ice clinging to his horns and the torn snarl of his wings slapping slush. The spear's haft stood like a black mast, quivering. The blue along its point ate every heat it found. He knew that if it stayed in him, it would unmake the warmth he had hoarded since he first cracked shell. He knew the math of flight. He knew weight and wind, updraft and the diminishing of strength when blood left a body. The flock memory within him hissed as if 1,000 reptile throats spoke at once. Pull it out or die. Other noises penetrated, shouts small as mice on the ice, men voices, human exhale, the clink of metal on leather, the old friend-enemy smell of sweat and terror, and wolves or something that remembered wolves. He did not know their names. He knew that the one who had thrown the spear was watching like a glacier. The air around that one tasted of death made patient and taught to reason. He struck the haft against the lake. The shock deepened the splintering of the ice beneath him into a spider's map. He struck it again, and the spear slid an inch. His breath came without flame. The cold had grasped his throat with 10 hook claws and held the fire tight behind his tongue. He opened his mouth anyway, muscle memory insisting, and a heatless plume gusted out, a ghost of what he was. Rage stiffened him. He slammed his body again, twisted, clawed at the haft with the horned curve of his inner wing joint, and at last the embedded point tore free of flesh and scale, leaving absence behind it. That absence hurt worst of all. He flung the spear away. It skittered over broken ice and slid to a stillness that seemed eager to be picked up by the ones who moved behind the glacier-eyed monster. He did not look at them again. He turned, shaking frozen water from his eyes, and with one wing half-crippled beat his way up, into a sky that hung only a little nearer than the memory of warmth. He flew east. Each wing beat cost thought. He learned the new shape of his body in the air, the slackness where once there had been an elastic power. The cold tunneled down the wound and made a home there. He fought to throw it out with movement. He fought to remember the warmth he had eaten as a hatchling beneath a sun that glittered on a great blue bay. He fought toward a scent that lay through the many thousand scents of snow, a line as fine as the line a mother draws over helpless young to teach them the borders of a nest. The scent would not be found by the living who had never flown. It was the line of a voice, the taste of a gaze, the compass of a hand raised on a windy cliff. He found shore and wind-mangled rocks where the surf froze in blown glass forms along their windward faces. He found a sky with lines of smoke and the iron reek of men. He passed over silent pines that lifted their needles as if in worship of ice. The smell of horses promised warmth, but horses were small fires and not the right one. The wound tugged at him like an old chain. He angled for it, ignoring the hunger that gathered under his breastbone, and licked his throat with slow, hopeless tongue. Below him, a man on the edge of a wall lifted his face and flung up an arm. The man's mouth made an O of astonishment, then a jagged grin. He smelled of salt and the sea and brine-dried cloth and of the same woman scent. as if her presence had altered him in ways that lingered. He was not the fire he needed, but he would do to guide him to it. "Viserion!" the man shouted, though he could not know the name, not truly, because men named things for their own keeping, and a dragon's name to itself is the first brightness in its egg and the first whisper of hot air when shell cracks. Yet the shape of the shout cut through Viserion's failing strength because it carried the cadence of another voice that had once named him and fed him and beat the air beside him on bare rock. He turned his head, scanned, and saw braziers burning within stone teeth. He saw the flags that hung stiff with rime. He saw pathways where the snow was trod hard under boots. He dropped. Men scattered like blown ash as he hit the outer yard. The impact cracked older ice along the gutter edges and sent up a cough of powdered snow. Pain scalded him. He folded his hurt wing against his body as if it were some wounded brother he must protect with the whole curve of his ribcage. He curled himself, making himself smaller, less of a target, keeping his head up because the world could still be dangerous and because he had no. He yet decided to lie down in it and be still. He tasted her in the smoke. Her boots ate frost. The fur over her shoulders held a faint steam where her breath went and was trapped. A ring of men formed without being asked, the way schools of small fish form patterns when a larger shape comes near. Viserion's pupils narrowed to blades. He stared at her and the many shapes of her, the worry, the refusal to be afraid, the calculation that counted the ways a dragon can die and refused to let this one be counted. She spoke. The sound came to him through other sounds as clear as the spear had been. "Viserion." The dragon watched the smallness of her mouth form the shape. His head sank a little. He had learned, when his brothers scrambled over his back and snatched meat from between his teeth, that it was sometimes better to wait than to snap, and if he waited long enough, a hand would come and hold out the right piece, and the right piece was not always meat. Daenerys Targaryen moved until her shadow fell across the wound along his shoulder. The cold sealed the blood that wanted to thaw. She smelled of storm and chosen salt and of fires that knew her body and kept its maps. She did not reach to touch him at first, which made his breath slow and the fierce line of his neck loosen. Her black and silver gloves curled and uncurled once, a quiet that only Viserion saw. Then she stripped one off and let the cold choose her skin and took the last steps. The moment her hand met the hot damp scales of his snout, the stiffness snapped within him like a bow unstrung. He let his head fall to her. She was so small that his breath could have knocked her down. She stayed up. The hand slid to the curve of his jaw, a place where his scales were small and fine as sand and warm. "I'm here," she said, voice roughened by the cold and the long flight and the older roughness of grief made a habit. "I'm here, my sweet one." Jorah Mormont stood a careful pace behind, and Tyrion, breath smoking in eyes hooded under the brim of a fur-lined cap that did not suit him, and Davos Seaworth, who looked at dragons as old sailors look at storms they have outlived, with wary gratitude that life is still occurring. The wall's garrison gathered. Jon Snow was not there. Jon Snow was elsewhere upon the white, with others, within the mouth of a winter that could chew steel and bone and not notice. The first understanding of that absence slid through Daenerys like a thin knife. It did not bleed yet. It lodged and waited while her living hand soothed the bone-deep tremor in Viserion's jaw. "Get fires," she said without looking up, "and oil, and honey, if there's any. What? Clean bandages, and maester. Clydas," Davos offered gently, "at Castle Black. Eastwatch's healer is a cooper with a good sense and a poor tolerance for blood. I'll bring them both." "Bring them," she said, and in that moment she could have said, "Bring me the sun," and men would have put their hands up to catch it if it fell. The wound had a rim like frozen iron. The skin around it had that tight, wet look wounds get when heat fights cold to a draw. The flesh within was dark and angry, but no longer the black blue of the spear. The spear lay on the yard's far side where men kept away from it as they would from a sleeping bear. Viserion's eyes found it and followed it until the wind lifted a curled fur somewhere and startled him back to the woman with her hand on his face. He exhaled and she held her ground and took the exhale like a priestess at an altar. Tyrion stepped nearer when she did not move. He did not try to hide that his hands shook inside his gloves. "He bled all the way from the lake," he said mildly, to make the facts smaller by making words for them. If the trail is that plain, those who hunt may follow. They are already coming, she said. Or not. It will not change what we do now. Daenerys, Yora said, a whole caution made into a name. She did not answer. She had learned the mathematics of power with a swiftness that frightened more than her dragons frightened, because it admitted no lies to itself. But here was an abacus that counted with different beads. She lowered herself to one knee. Her cloak dragged in the red slush and came away heavy and soon arm-cold. She put her forehead against the horned ridge above Viserion's eye. Branched frost broke and melted under that warmth. The dragon's lid slid down, not fully, because some part of him had learned the same mathematics and would not sleep while danger breathed, but enough to take pressure from the world. Drogon? She asked softly. Regal. He answered with a small, throttled sound that had no flame in it. He answered with a smell. Her mind, tuned by 100 mornings and 1,000 evenings to the vocabulary of his body, understood. They were alive. They were where Jon Snow was not. They were circling the space where he had been. Your Grace, Davos said. Not a title, but a warning wrapped in courtesy. If you're going to go back up there, I am not, she said so quickly he blinked. Then, I am not going anywhere until he can lift this wing. Then we must make him able, Tyrion murmured, and for a heartbeat there was a flash under his carefulness, the architect's gladness at difficulty that might be solved. He went toward the spear. The soldiers near it made dreadful faces and stepped aside with ritual caution, as if the weapon might start thinking if they looked at it too long. Up close, it was smoked with rime and glitter. The metal was not like the honest iron he had known as a boy pulling at the bellows in Casterly Rock's lower forges, nor like the Valyrian steel he had seen and coveted with all the complicated emotions of a Lannister looking at a thing that had belonged to old kings. This metal was a story of winter made dense. He did not touch it. He studied how the point had fractured scale. He measured the length of the haft against Viserion's shoulder fro, where he stood and found that the creature had done the only thing he could have done, thrown it out before it could be driven deeper by his own weight. He looked up to find Daenerys looking at him, seeing the thinking. They were not friends the way children are friends, hands closed around a single marble, pulling and giggling, but they were partners in the work of not dying, which was the only work that mattered. He nodded. Oil, as you said, heat without flame at first, gentle hands, and, if the gods of the north will lend what gods seldom do, no infection. Davos returned with Clydas, old and hardy as driftwood, and with a fisher's wife whose apron was already stiff with old blood. She had a mouth that made its own laws. She set to boiling cloth in a cauldron set over coals piled high as piety would let them. The yard filled with the smell of iron and singed hair and bodies that wanted to live standing very close to heat. Yora went for honey without asking because he remembered the Dothraki using honey to keep wounds sweet, and because he had also learned the mathematics and knew that when he counted what he could do and set it against what he could not, he must not make the little number smaller. Daenerys did not move from Viserion's head except to shift her hand when the dragon's breath demanded it. She talked to him. She talked the way women talk to babies and sailors talk to ships and old men talk to orchards in the first fall spring when they go out with buckets to wash the branches with lime. She told him about a shoreline he had never seen, about palms and roofs of woven reed and women whose bracelets clanked like rain. She told him about the time Drogon had decided to sit on the very rock she had intended for herself and how she had had to lay her body along his side and pretend that had been her plan. She told him, in a voice that kept its humor and lost none of its depth, that he was a stubborn, beautiful boy and that no cold would make a liar of her. Not when she had sworn to keep him in the sky until the sky itself broke. In the spaces between words, she listened for hoofbeats on the snow and the larger, slower beat of wings. Once, she thought she heard screaming from the east, the thin, distance-bent scream of men who had seen too much ice become too much motion, but it might have been the wind between the stones. By the time the cloths were hot and the honey had been melted in a little brass pan to loosen its thickness and make it flow like gold, a memory of color had returned to the edges of the wound. The fisher's wife did not flinch when she saw its size, because seeing is not helped by flinching. She went to work with the gentleness of a woman washing a giant's child. Clydas muttered to himself and counted pulses. He could feel through scaled skin that was warm everywhere except where the spear had made itself known. Oil softened dried blood, which came away in sheets, revealed the ragged tear beneath, and made men look away for a heartbeat because this was not a horse and not a man, and yet pain is universally legible. Viserion endured because the hand did not leave his face. When the cloth stung him, he closed his mouth hard on sound, and frost shattered along his teeth and fell like sugar into the trampled snow. When the honey touched the wound, a groan rose from deep within him, older than speech, older than the sky. Daenerys spoke over it, and the groan folded itself small and went quiet like a defeated wave. "You ought to rest," Tyrion said without expecting she would, and he was right. She did not, and so the hours grew themselves around the small circle they had made. The dragon, the woman, the heat that did not care which of them survived it. The men whose breath made a low ghostly fog that drifted and thickened in the lee of Viserion's folded wing. The wall kept its enormous counsel. Somewhere far beyond it, something counted men like pebbles and pushed them forward and lifted its hand to gather the cold closer to its body. Here, the mathematics of a single life set itself against that and demanded an answer. Near dusk, when sky and snow flirted with the same shade and no one could tell when one began, the beating came. Men turned their heads without thinking, as animals do when weather changes. Daenerys stood so quickly the world lurched and Viserion's head followed the movement, as if he were the one who had stood and she were the one bound to him. Drogon came down first, a black stroke across a eroded white page, and regal behind him like a green fire seen through thick glass. They landed with twin thuds that made the brazier spit. Their necks arched toward Viserion. A sound rose in the yard that men who had never stood near dragons would have named a roar, but which was in fact a palimpsest of things. Greeting, command, complaint, the way a mother scolds a wounded son and the way a brother pretends not to be afraid. The air warmed in an instant. It was not only the breath, they kept their fire caged, understanding without being told that flame near honey and cloth and men's hair would lead to arithmetic no one wanted to do. But something subtler, like a hearth that refuses to let a house freeze regardless of whether food is on the table. Under that warmth, Viserion's side rose a little easier. Under that warmth, the smell of infection receded in men's minds, though it had never arrived. Under that warmth, Daenerys almost let herself close her eyes and lean her head against Drogon's chest the way she had leaned against Viserion's ridge. She did not. She put her hand on Drogon's shoulder and then Regal's and felt the vibrations in their bones answering to her bones. "Where?" she asked softly, to them and to the air, and they knew she asked not about here but about there. The lake, the ring of stones, the half-wolf men, the marchers who did not breathe. Regal turned his head east and lifted a wing halfway and let it fall. Not defeat, not yet, grief trying to make itself into direction. Drogon's eyes flashed the way molten metal flashes when it cools and topskins over. He hissed low. Between them, a picture formed without words. Men on a rock, a hammer of ice descending, a shape falling into white that closed around it with indecent haste, and then another shape breaking from the clouds, black, terrible, familiar, bearing burden and fire. "Jon!" Davos breathed. The name pulled out of him as if by a fisherman with a sudden strong tug against the line. The king in the north? Daenerys heard the name like a bell. She looked at the frost rim on her cloak and the red honey glaze dried in patterns on her gloves, and she felt a thin strand within her tilt toward breaking. "Alive," she said without asking if he was. "He is alive until you bring me his body, and then he is alive in memory, and until then there is no third arithmetic." The words steadied her as cold stone under boot steadies a person wavering near a cliff's edge. Davos nodded because hope needs small agreements to stand upright. "Your Grace," he said, "let me take a fast horse to Eastwatch's far lookouts. Let me send men to the first high points. If he's anywhere within a circle of 40 miles, we'll set watchfires he can see." "No fires," Tyrion objected, gentle but firm. "We burn for warmth. We do not burn as beacons, not while others watch for signals as well as we do." Davos looked older and not more defeated. "Then flags in daylight, horns. The old ways before fires." "Do it," Daenerys said. "And if any man comes back to me and lies to make me easier, I will know it and he will regret it." It was not cruelty. It was a kind of love, the hard kind that keeps a sword at hand when others sing. They moved. It was the best gift men can give themselves when winter points its finger. Movement carried away certain kinds of fear the way wind carries smoke. Runners went out with ropes and furs and poles to test the first treacherous drifts, to lay branches over hidden ice. Horns rolled their music along the curtain of the wall, echoed against stones older than all the houses of men put together. Within the yard, the pool of heat around 3 dragons became an accident of summer. Daenerys fed Viserion with handfuls of meat turned warm over the coals and cut small with a long hunting knife, because Scale told her that he would not want to tear and shake yet. He took the meat with offended delicacy, not snapping at her fingers, not letting gratitude show. He drank water warmed to the temperature of blood and smelled it first as if he expected the cold to be disguised within it. When she was sure he would not throw the food up, she allowed herself to sit against his foreleg and close her eyes for the span of 100 beats of a dragon heart. When she opened them, dusk had gathered more law. Lamps had been lit along the wall walk. Men huddled in knots as if the act of at least being near other bodies would bully back what lay beyond. Yora had found a chair and forgotten to sit in it. Tyrion had found a barrel and remembered to sit, his legs dangling and his hands cupped around a mug that steamed. Drogon and Rhaegal stood with their heads half lowered toward their brother, eyes slit tight with wakefulness. She did not ask if there had been news. If there had, it would have found her without asking. She took one of the hot cloths that had been set aside and pressed it to a new place along Viserion's wound where the honey had skinned over and the skin underneath had to be coaxed into believing in warmth again. When he flinched this time, he put his head down with weary resignation, not rage. She smiled for the first time since he had fallen from the sky. It was not a triumphant smile. It was the kind of smile a person makes when her hands are busy with saving and discover, unexpectedly, that saving is possible. She murmured something in High Valyrian. The language fit in her mouth like a song remembered without effort. It named the first fire. It named the last summer. It named the space between. Viserion's breath deepened. She set the cloth aside and put her hand again to his face. The scalded gold of his eyes met hers. For a moment it was as if there were no men, no horn signals, no past shaped like a broken wheel, no future shaped like a blade. There was only the fact of their two beings looking back into each other. Then he blinked. The moment did not end. It receded into the body like warmth taking up residence, an ember that would answer when blown upon. Later, when the night had settled into its usual argument with itself, whether to spend all its darkness now or save some for the hours before dawn, and the yard's noises had found a softer register, Davos returned with a man so frosted, he looked like a snowbush cut into the form of a human being. The man carried nothing. He had emptied himself of the things he might have carried so that he could carry what he had seen. Davos's glance found Daenerys and held for a beat too long. She stood before he spoke. "Your Grace," Davos said, each word heavy and handled carefully. A rider was seen west of the old ranger's hut, a black shape on the snow. The horse was staggering. The rider was not fully seated in the saddle. When the watcher blew his horn, the rider turned his head as if hearing but did not alter course. He was headed for Eastwatch's outer pens. He fell before he reached them. He is alive. The mathematics inside Daenerys moved like an abacus flung by a skilled hand. Counting, realigning, deciding. She did not consent to the wave of relief. She did not yet permit it. "Bring him," she said. "Bring him here." It was not compassion, not entirely. It was necessity. Lives were knots. You must pull them close to untangle them or cut them. Davos hesitated. "He needs warmth within walls." "Here," she repeated, softer and more dangerous, because the danger was not at Davos but at the world that would try to dictate. What belonged where? Here, with the heat that will not fail. They brought Jon Snow into the circle of 3 dragons and 1 woman and the men and small fires that served them. He was half drowned in his own ice. The hair that had been damp with sweat when she had seen him last, was now welded into a tangle by frost and wind. His lips had the color of dawn seen through skin. The color in his cheeks was the same color meat gets when it has only just ceased pretending to be cold but has not yet remembered how to be warm. He had marks along his neck that made Tyrion's mouth compress and made Yora's hand find his sword hilt before he remembered he did not need it for this. His wounds were strange wounds. They had not been made by blade, nor by neat arrow. They looked like hands that were not hands had reached through water that was not water and tried to remove him from the world by pulling on his throat. Davos's face fought itself. Clydes's hand trembled and then steadied. The fisher's wife set her jaw and shouted for more water and more cloths, and for men to stop breathing on her and to find a space for the dying that might yet be the living. Daenerys came forward. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Not because the world paused for her. She did not believe in that, however many titles had been set in a string after her name, but because the number of feelings trying to cross the space between her and the man on the litter exceeded the width of that space. When at last some part of them arrived, they arrived in a tide that began in her chest and went out toward her fingers and ended in a sizzle at the tips, as if she were barefoot on a hearthstone. His eyes opened because her shadow crossed his face and his body remembered, in the deep old place where recognition lives before language, that the shape of that shadow meant warmth. He looked at her as one might look at a candle in a cavern. He looked, then closed his eyes again, not in death but in the human error of believing one can rest at the conclusion of an ordeal. She would not let him. She took his hand and felt the brittle salt of old frost along his knuckles and the slow thud within his wrist, and she bent and spoke in the tone she had used on the dragon that had fallen from the sky. "Jon," she said, "not a title, a name that made the air between them intimate. Open your eyes." He did, because not to would have been to break a promise he had never spoken aloud. He blinked. He tried to speak and failed. He tried to rise and she pressed him down, and that was the first time in many years she had pressed a man down with kindness and not with the power of command. "Don't," he rasped. And then he gathered himself as men gather firewood from the edges of a blizzard before the blizzard understands what they are doing. "Don't go back. Not now. They're coming." "I know," she said. She did not know, not in the way he knew, but she knew enough. "We are here. We will go where we must. Not before we are ready." "I was a fool," he murmured, and for a heartbeat she saw the boy in him. The boy who had learned so early not to take up too much space in a room, who had learned to be valiant as a way of not hurting, who had learned to be stubborn because the world took advantage of every other softness he offered. "I asked you to." "Hush," she said, a word she had never loved and now used with tenderness. "You asked me to believe you." "I did. I ask you to live. You will. And you will not call yourself a fool where I can hear it." The last line had iron in it. He breathed as if he had been given permission. He slept then, as only the nearly lost sleep, without dreams, without twitching, climbing down into warmth as if descending into a well where water whispers. Davos hovered. Clydes arranged hot bricks near the man's feet the way a grandmother would. Not a maester, because the old arts predated the titles. Men made a wider ring but did not leave. It seemed an offense to the night to turn their backs on the small and improbable salvage they had just accomplished. The dragons settled in a triangular watch. Viserion's wing extended the smallest fraction, enough to share heat, not so much as to strain. Daenerys stayed where she had been all day, except now she divided herself, as women do when they are required to be multiple hearths at once. One hand was on Viserion, the other, at intervals, found Jon's wrist. She thought of the mathematics another way, not as sums and differences but as weights on a scale, and on one side the cold piled its fingerprints, and on the other side she set her stubbornness and the lives that had chosen to arrange themselves around her, and the way a dragon will return even when the spear has found him, because the sky is his first vow. In the deep of the night, when men's chins drop to their chests if no one shakes them, when the stars seem like things one could pick and eat if only one could reach them, a small sound drew her attention back to Viserion. The membrane at the base of his wounded wing trembled, then tightened, as if a note had been plucked there and vibrated out along his bones. His eyes opened, not wide, not wild, but with a calm that had been earned by pain's passage. He lifted his wing an inch. He set it down. He did it again. The point of it was not to rise. The point was to be able to try. She laughed softly, a sound she had not prepared herself for, and it felt like a drink of something hot. "Good," she said. "Good, my love. That is enough tonight." It snowed a little then, the large lazy flakes that arrive when the air has exhausted itself of violence and must rebuild before it can rage again. The wind turned its face away and muttered to some other corner of the world. On the litter beside the brazier, Jon Snow breathed deeper. On the stones, a spear lay unwatched, its poison dulled by not being used. In the triangle of dragons, warmth knitted itself into a fabric strong enough to catch a sky should fall. At dawn, men woke into a world that had not destroyed them. They were surprised, as men always are, by simple survival. The light came as if squeezed through a hand. The wall blushed with a color it does not often permit itself. Something not yet gold, not entirely gray, and the frost along the carts and braces traced ferns and trees that had never grown there. The first crow called, rude as all crows are, unapologetic about existence continuing. Regal shook himself like a dog and sent snow in a shining halo. Drogon yawned and showed a cavern in which dozen men could have sheltered from any storm and never been cold again. Viserion lifted his wing to its half height and held it there longer. Daenerys stood and the whole yard stood with her, because hours of studying a single body teach you to read its meaning the instant it alters. He turned his head toward her and the gold of his eyes caught the uncertain light and made certainty. She put her hand, not the glove, not the symbol, but the human hand, against his face one last time. "This is ours," she said, not aloud, or perhaps aloud and only crows heard it and laughed for secret reasons. This and what comes. What came began not with horns or ice shatter or a trumpet of doom, but with a messenger whose boots were raw at the seams and whose breath made clouds that would have embarrassed a less focused man. He had run down from a watchpoint a mile up the wall's edge. He had seen movement on the far side, a ripple in the white like a fish beneath milk, the suggestion of a line that was not snow and not wind. Not yet an army, not yet here, but the beginning of intention making itself visible. He stood in the circle of dragons and men and did not kneel because there was no time for the pageantry of fear. "They are moving," he said, "not toward us, west along the wall, as if looking for something that escaped them." Daenerys absorbed the word escaped as a personal threat and a personal victory. She looked at Jon, who lay in a condition that would have frightened a younger woman because it resembled death. She looked at Viserion, who had made his body into a shelter against a cold that wished to draft him into its numbers. She looked at Drogon and Regal, who were lightning tamed by the idea that she was who she said she was. "Send riders to Castle Black with what we have learned," she said. "Send to Winterfell. Tell them we will need carts of oil, thick wool, tar, anything that burns slow and stubborn. Tell them to send men who know about walls and wind. Tell them to send women who do not faint at the sight of blood. Tell them I will need ravens at every hour." Tyrion's mouth twitched in something that was almost a smile. "Shall I also tell them you require their oaths? They have given those," she said. "If they intend to take them back, let them do it looking into my eyes. But now there is work that mocks oaths with its urgency." Yora had slept for an hour and pretended he had not. He drew closer. "You will need to go south eventually. The dragon pit. The queen who waits with lions at her back." "Eventually," Daenerys said. "There is a line before me that I must walk first. It leads through a sky that tried to remove my son from it and failed." She looked at Viserion as she spoke and felt the new name she had not used yet shift in her like a newborn turning. Survivor, not enough. Returner, that had more of the truth. He had left the edge of the world and found his way back to warmth, and in that finding had given her a gift she had not expected from it, the knowledge that return is possible. Jon stirred, and the whole yard forgot politics as easily as a mother forgets the argument she had with a neighbor when her child coughs. His eyes opened and did not immediately shut again. They focused with effort. He saw first the ceiling of gray sky and then the low black curve that was a dragon's shoulder and then her face. The arrangement of those three facts made something inside him relax and something else harden like iron finding the seam where it wanted to cool. "I lived," he said, as if confiding a secret he had only just learned and had not yet decided how to keep. "You did," she said. "Do not do it so rarely that I grow unused to it." He made the shape of a smile and then grimaced because smiling hurt. "I saw you," he whispered, "in the air, on Drogon. Fire. I thought," he swallowed. The swallow was a war. "I thought I'd never see it again." "You will," she said. "You will see everything again that is worth seeing. Not because the world permits it, but because I say so, and because he—" And here she turned her head toward Viserion with pride that had no shame in it. "Returned to me to make it so." Jon's gaze found the wound. He flinched, not in disgust but in the human reflex that wants to pull hurt away from itself even when the hurt is not its own. His eyes widened. How? It was not disbelief. It was reverence trying not to embarrass itself. "Stubbornness," she said. "And honey. And cloth. And the fact that winter, for all its speeches, does not know what to do when something it aimed to kill refuses." She reached for his hand before she realized she had, and took it, and he let her, and the mathematics altered again, as mathematics will when someone adds a number that was not expected to the column. He looked at their joined hands, and then at the dragons, and then up at the wall's blue shadow. He looked back at her with a gaze that made her aware of both the cold on her skin and the warmth under it. "We'll need to move," he said. "Soon. North of here. West. They don't like the river ice there. It betrays them." The knowledge came out of him like a spring. He had been where knowledge breeds in darkness and makes itself into maps without ink. "We will," she said simply, "after we teach a wing to lift." He closed his eyes and opened them again in the same motion, a blink that became a vow. The day arang. Ed itself around the vow the way a town arranges itself around a marketplace. Orders were given and obeyed. Men ate and were surprised that taste had returned. The fisher's wife cuffed a soldier for standing in her way and then kissed his cheek to repair it. Clydas argued with a taller, stupider man and won. Tyrion wrote with fingers that had grown stiff and swore he had never valued ink so much. Yora made a small sanctuary where Daenerys might sit out of the wind and not be seen doing it, so that no one would use her sitting as an excuse to be less than their best. Viserion lifted his wing and held it again, longer this time, and when he set it down, he breathed out in a way that was almost a laugh, the low chuffing noise he had made as a hatchling when he discovered that meat can be stolen from a brother if one is cunning and quick. Drogon reached out and touched his snout to his brother's, and the sound that followed was nothing like a roar and everything like a family letting itself believe a small good thing has occurred. In the west, under a sky that remains a roof even when it threatens rain, a line moved along the far side of the wall. It was patient, and it was many, and it had time. Here, in a stony yard where honey and oil and breath had been spent like coin and not yet finished, people who had less time made more of it, turning minutes into tools, turning love into a kind of discipline, turning a dragon's return into a beginning instead of an epilogue. And if the day had been a story told to children to keep them still through a storm, it would have at least this truth to leave in their ears, that what falls can rise and return, not as what it was before, but as something that has made a bargain with the world and intends to keep it.